welcome to the Hampton Institute. Our deepest thanks to the Tarr family and all our co-sponsors for making this opportunity possible. This panel, Investing in Art and Culture, is moderated by Lisa Dennison, Chairman of Sotheby's North and South America and former Director of the Guggenheim Museum. Please welcome Lisa Dennison.
Thank you, Ruth, and you're actually welcoming me and the entire panel because we wanted to keep this informal, and I will introduce the panel members from here. Then I will make a sort of brief statement that I hope will be reactive and ask specific questions of the panelists for about 50 minutes, and then it will be your turn. So rather than the panelists making statements, we're going to do it as a kind of Q&A. Sitting next to me on my right is Eric Fischl. Eric was born in New York City in 1948. He grew up in the suburbs of Long Island and became a practicing artist, having gone to art school at Cal Arts in Valencia and moving to Chicago afterwards, where he was a guard at the Museum of Contemporary Art. Eric has had an illustrious artistic career, and most of you know him, so I don't want to focus on that, but I do want to focus on why Eric's here and what we're going to talk about, what perspective he's going to bring to you today. And it's a new venture that he has been working on that is really so exciting, called America Now and Here, which is a really unprecedented kind of transformative cultural experience on a national scale. And Eric's going to talk more about it. But it's an invitation for artists, different artists from different media, contemporary art, poetry, film, theater, and music, to celebrate American creativity as a driver for new ideas and American innovation. But the format is what's so unique about it. And Eric will actually bring these artists and art together in 4 tractor-trailer trucks, which will journey to different cities throughout our country, and when they get there, come together in a very unique way so that there will be a museum, a place for performance, a kind of town square wherever the truck might stop. And it's exactly the kind of thing I think we're talking about on our topic today, so we'll hear more about that from Eric in a little bit. We're also delighted to have Professor Margo Lyon.
Oh God, not professor.
Okay.
I'm an adjunct. I don't think that counts.
All right, we've got Margo here. Margo's interest in education and politics have happily merged with her life in theater. She served as co-chair of the Arts and Policy Committee for President Obama during the recent presidential campaign and produced the fundraiser Barack on Broadway in the fall of 2007. She and Damian, and you'll hear about in a minute, are both on the President's Committee on the Arts and Humanities, and Margo is co-chair. She's an adjunct professor and member of the Dean's Council at NYU Tisch School of the Arts, is on a number of boards, has worked in politics, first on Capitol Hill for Senator Daniel Brewster, and then for Senator Robert Kennedy, and following Senator Kennedy's death, taught school for many, many years. After spending 3 years at the University of Iowa's Playwrights Workshop, Margo's focus turned from education to her earlier interest in theater. Her productions have garnered 20 Tony Awards, a Pulitzer Prize, Olivier Award, and you are working on a new production of Catch Us If You Can, which I hope we hear.
Catch Me If You Can.
Catch Me If You Can, exactly. And Damian Woetzel was, as we all know, a principal dancer at the New York City Ballet from 1989 until his retirement from the stage in 2008. He is not only a performer, but he is a choreographer, a director, and a frequent speaker on arts and arts policy. So I think Damian brings us a perspective today from really all sides, from the perspective of the artist, from the perspective of someone directing the arts, and certainly from someone on the other side of the coin thinking about arts policy. He holds a master's in public administration from Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. He served on the recent Harvard Task Force on the Arts and has, since November of 2009, been on Obama's Committee on the Arts and Humanities. And I think we should just take a minute to understand what that is. I think their brief in a word is that the nation's cultural assets contribute to the vibrancy of its society, and as such, the committee works to really foster partnerships between members of the private sector and the government, creating kind of dynamic links. And as such, they work with federal agencies, the NEA, the NEH, IMLS, and civic, corporate, foundation, and private funders to really further U.S. national investment in cultural life. And there are three specific areas I think that the committee is focused on. One is education, the other is economic revitalization through the arts, and thirdly, cultural diplomacy. And I hope today we'll talk about the relevance and importance of each one of those. So, but I would like to just start by setting the stage, which will lead to the first question. And I'm going to quote a little bit with the permission of a very good colleague of mine, someone who was at Columbia University and now teaches at Sotheby's Institute, named Andres Santos, who just wrote an article in the Art newspaper. I don't know how many of you read that, but that's sort of our Bible, in June. And he really took on the topic, or the headline was, "In a world mired in economic uncertainty and with cash for the arts disappearing, how do we argue for culture?" And indeed, that's our topic. He said, and I think we all know and agree, that in times of economic paucity, the arts is sometimes seen as frivolous, as an amenity even. And during the recession, a vast pool of public, private, and philanthropic capital has gone up in smoke. So the arts grow flush in the good years, but when fiscal restraint forces centers of power to focus on other things, arts are sharply, sharply cut back. And I think one of the things that we all struggle with, those of us who try to raise money for the arts, which I did for many years as a museum director, is a kind of shift in focus of today's philanthropists and a perception that art may not be a real issue, but rather healthcare, the environment, education should be our funding priorities. And we're up against people who are really trying to decide where to direct their surplus funds, and it's very, very challenging. So the Gates Foundation, for example, and the priorities they've established seem to be what a lot of today's philanthropists where they want to drive their funding. According to the Americans for the Arts, local government support is estimated to drop for a second year in a row, and that is not a surprise. The NEA today runs on less money in real terms than it did in 1992, and certainly the 2011 budget calls for further cuts. The private sector, and there's about $150 billion of charitable assets there that vanished in 2009. That was a really, really severe loss. Foundation giving has been reduced somewhere between 10 to 80%, depending on the foundation. And I could go on with more statistics, but I think the real point is a more philosophical one. And that is, in my opinion, that, and others as well, we seem to be on the cusp of a generational shift in giving priorities. The so-called new philanthropy has yet to warm up to the arts. So the sort of steady, ongoing support for institutions that was considered almost noblesse oblige not long ago seems increasingly quaint in the eyes of today's globally minded, result-oriented, techno-savvy plutocrats, and there I'm actually quoting Andras. But I think it's true that arguments that used to work on behalf of the arts no longer do. And if we look back at what's fueled American giving for a century, I think it divides into three categories. First, there was the great nations argument, and that was, America should have a cultural life equal to Europe's. And this reached its crest after World War II, certainly, in the context of superpower rivalry. If the Russians had a space program, we had a space program. If they had the ballet, we had the ballet. And certainly helped spark expansion in foundation and government support again after the 60s. After the great nations argument came the great cities argument. Local pride became a very powerful incentive for the establishment of museums, concert halls, theaters, libraries across America. And that spawned really the evolution of community foundations and corporate citizenship, which sort of very much started to disappear in the 80s. And then in the 90s, with increasing globalization and the elitist overtones of this, the art community set about looking for new rationales.